Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. 'Tis the season for trades. We've got a lot of trade discussions to get into today. Let's go. It's not December 15th yet. It's December 12th, but that's okay. We'll take it. We've got a lot to break down today. I'm Trevor Lane. You can find me on Twitter at Trevor_Lane, joined by Keith Smith at Keith Smith NBA. Make sure you check out our Clips channel and put a link to that in the description down below. And of course, subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office Show. You know, we're going to be keeping you informed all the way through trade season. Keith, we've got a lot to get into today on the trade part. This is wonderful.
This is it, man. This is what the Front Office Show is all about. This next 2 months, and then we get back into talking more about what's going on the floor in the playoffs, and then we'll get into the off season and everything. But yeah, man, we're hitting one of our tent poles here, the trade deadline, and in the lead up to it, I'm super excited. It's so funny. I mean, the running joke is the minute either one of us gets in the car to run an errand or do school pickup is when a trade happens. Today, when the main piece that we're going to talk about is from Shams Charania at The Athletic. With all this trade rumor and noise and buzz and all that, I was in the middle of folding laundry. So it's always when you're in the middle of some benign task that these that these big things come out. So, but yeah, I'm psyched, man. This is what our show is like built on is this sort of stuff. So I'm excited to dive into all of it.
Well, this is how ridiculously in sync we are. I had actually just been putting laundry into the washing machine when that happened. So we did not plan that, but there you go.
Hit us up. Let's go.
Hashtag not a sponsor.
Yeah.
All right.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Let's change that. Let's start with this. My Lakers pursuing Bojan Bogdanovic. Maybe a little bit ironic. I mean, he dropped 38 on them last night. He was absolutely fantastic. Of course, we know.
Yeah, I'd like to get him too after that.
Right. Of course, I don't think it was just he scored 38. Suddenly, Rob picks up the phone. Rob Pelinka picks up the phone and says, "Hey, we need this guy." But as of right now, according to Shams Charania, the Lakers offering a protected first-round pick plus salaries. Mark Stein adding in that the Pistons so far have said no to a protected. They want unprotected first-round pick for a 33-year-old Bojan Bogdanovic, shooting 44% from three on the season, 21 points per game. Has 3 years, including this season, under contract, though the final year is only $2 million guaranteed. Can you tell I've already broken this stuff down for Lakers Nation today? Next year, looking at about $20 million in salary. So, Keith, when we look at the outgoing pieces for the Lakers, I instantly jumped to, well, it must be Patrick Beverley and Kendrick Nunn. You said, well, let's take a look at the math. What are you thinking here on a potential deal to get Bogdanovic to LA?
Yeah, you want to get Bogdanovic, you've got to get to about 15.6 million in matching salary. Lakers are a tax team. They'll be a tax team after a Bogdanovic trade, barring something crazy unexpected happening here, but before it. So that means that they can do basically 125% of their outgoing salary. So that's about 15.6 million to be able to match on Bogdanovic's 19.55 million. So you're absolutely right. The number one piece in that, Patrick Beverley. That's the easiest way to get there. That's 13 million. I think also when we get beyond the math and the cap sheets, that makes sense on the floor because that's in effect kind of who Bogdanovic would replace in the opening group, I would guess. I'm fairly certain they're pretty comfortable with Schroeder now, locked in at the starting point guard spot. You slide Walker to the 3, which he naturally is a 3, or to the 2 rather, instead of at the 3, and then plug Bogdanovic in at the 3. Him and LeBron become essentially interchangeable, 3-4 forwards, and off we go. So I think we're in a position there where that is makes sense basketball wise. It also makes sense salary wise. Now, Kendrick Nunn, yeah, maybe. You've got some options you can go to though, because you can do you could do Damian Jones and then one of the minimum guys. You could do lots of different looks on this. Obviously, Westbrook if you wanted to make the whole deal much bigger and expand it and all that sort of stuff, that could happen. But I don't think we're going to see anything like that. So none in Beverly probably is what makes the most sense. The Pistons are miles below the tax, so that's not a major concern for them. The Lakers could even throw cash in to cover part of the money they're sending. But yeah, this one makes a little bit more sense than some of the things we hear where it essentially has to be Russell Westbrook who's part of the trade.
Right. Certainly easier to get something done, particularly as we've discussed around the NBA. I don't know if Russell Westbrook's value has changed as far as teams wanting assets added to Russ to get them to take him on his $47 million expiring contract. Whereas to the Lakers, he's actually been a fairly beneficial player coming off the bench for them. Certainly not worth 47 million, but he's at least not been a negative on the floor for them. So I think there's less incentive to move him, particularly if they have to pay to move him. So
yeah, definitely do not give up assets to move Westbrook at this point. There's no need for that.
Exactly. And so with that, I think it makes it less likely we see a Russell Westbrook trade. More likely it's something like what we're talking about here. Now, my question though, because I got a little nauseous when I saw unprotected first round pick is what the Pistons want. I mean, the Pistons just traded, it doesn't matter as much, but the Pistons just traded Kelly Olynyk straight up for this guy. Essentially, Saban Lee was in the deal as well. And suddenly it's an unprotected first round pick. I would be extremely cautious if I was the Lakers about throwing in an unprotected first round pick for a 33-year-old Bogdanovic. I just think that's danger zone when you start talking about a future pick like that with no protections on a player that almost certainly will not be on your team when that pick comes due.
Yeah, I think we're working with a little bit of different math than when he was traded before because of just having signed that extension with the Pistons. Now you get those at least an extra year. You could get two. That's fully under team control there. So that does change things a little bit as opposed to where he was an expiring deal headed to Detroit. So that's probably a benefit. A lot of times we think of these things as well. We'd rather have the expiring, but not if you're the Lakers, unless again, you'd be sacrificing a chunk of your cap space next year. So that has to factor in here too. Last round of cap space projections I did for Spot Track. I just did them. We're going to be doing these monthly leading up. I have them at now 33.4 million in the off season. So you're taking on 20 million. You're not going to be a cap space team then. Because what happens, just to nerd out a minute here, the minute you drop below the combined amount of your other exceptions, you're not going to be a cap space team because those get added back against your cap space. So that would be the mid-level and the biannual. So that would put them back over the cap. So in this case, you're really looking at it as, all right, Bogdanovic plus a first, plus the players we'd have to give up, plus our cap space. Is that worth it? Is that where we want to go, for the Lakers? Because now you've kind of sacrificed some, if not all of your flexibility. Because the other challenge with Russell Westbrook that comes in is I've seen a lot of people say, well, we don't need to have cap space because we can just sign and trade Westbrook in the summer. Well, that's not going to be something teams are jumping at doing. No. Teams are not going to be super excited about, let's sign and trade Westbrook, for the stuff, especially if you don't have stuff to attach to it. And that's where that becomes a little bit of a risky proposition as well. So I do think Bogdanovic is great. I think he fits a lot of what the Lakers need. I just don't know that is the long-term, this is it. This guy pushes us into title contention, makes us definitely a playoff team. But if you can get him for Beverly Nunn and a protected first round pick, just in case things go sideways, I'd probably be all over that. Because this is a guy 21 points per game, and he's basically right knocking on the door of a 50, 40, 90 season. And I don't think his shots are going to get any worse playing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. So I think he'd be a really, really good fit in LA.
Yeah, he'd be a great fit. There's no question there. The protected versus unprotected is huge. He's going to have many other shooters. There's going to be other teams. Just big picture trade market. There's a lot of teams right now that see themselves as in the mix, and not that many teams that are seeing themselves as out of the mix and therefore acting as sellers on the market. So that's going to be a factor as well. There's going to be competition for these players, but if you can get Bogdanovic, you can just give up a protected pick. Yeah, I think I'm for that, depending on what the protections look like. But you just got to be careful with that moving forward. Now, before we move on to the next topic here,
sure.
Lonnie Walker, his situation. A lot of Lakers fans are looking at him and saying, this is a guy that we want to try to keep. How would trading for Bogdanovic impact your ability to keep Lonnie Walker as well as Austin Reeves?
Yeah, for the Lakers, they're only going to have non-bird rights on Walker, so the most they can offer him is 7.77 million in next year. So just under $8 million next year's salary. Now, as far as keeping him, as far as paying him, no impact, right? Because you can go, and that is. Yeah, I should be very clear on this too. That's if you're re-signing him using those non-bird rights. If you're re-signing him as using cap space, well, then you can give him whatever amount of cap space you have that you want to give to Lonnie Walker. But in this case, if you're using the non-bird rights, you're going to have to you're going to be capped at basically $7.8 million. So I think for him, that's that's interesting, right? And that becomes tricky. Austin Reeves, they've got early bird rights on him. He could come prey into the arenas provision, which we'll do a whole separate breakdown at some point on the arenas provision and on Austin Reeves and what that looks like, because he's a really good example of a guy who could get an arenas offer and put the Lakers in a semi-difficult position on deciding what to do. But in this case, the real barrier is, let's say they get Bogdanovic or somebody else, and that's how they use cap space. It really comes down to, is Walker willing to take 7.8 million in first year salary next year? We've seen Bobby Portis, great example, right? Did a deal, signed another deal, then rolled into his bird rights, and then the Bucks took care of him down the line.
Yeah.
Goran Dragic has done that with the Miami Heat in the past, where, all right, I'm going to take a lot less, and then you're going to take care of me down the line because you've got my bird rights. So maybe something like that could happen with him. But the real barrier is, what is the Lakers tax limit? Like, what is the upper bounds of, this is how much we're willing to pay in the tax? And for most teams, unless you're a surefire title contender or you're super duper deep pocket ownership group, it's about 20 million over the tax is roughly where teams kind of draw a line and say, we don't want to go too much deeper than that. So that's another thing to keep a little bit of an eye on here. One thing on Bogdanovic too, just to know, James Edwards did kind of I don't want to say it was a feature, but he covers the Pistons for The Athletic. He wrote, Troy Weaver doesn't really want to trade Bogdanovic because they see him as a leader for the Pistons. That's why I think they're driving kind of a high asking price. But as we always say, it's December 12th. As we're recording this, let's have this conversation. We've got 2 months to go till the trade deadline.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of time here before a deal would have to get done. Obviously, for most teams, though, they'd rather see it, especially in the insanely compact Western Conference. They'd rather get deals done sooner rather than later. We'll see what ultimately gives in that situation. Couldn't you go, if you operate as an above the cap team, couldn't you just go MLE for Lonnie Walker if that's...
Yeah, but you're probably going to be restricted to the taxpayer MLE, and that'll be less than what you could give them on the non-bird rights. Right. So that's your tricky part there. So I mean, you could, but if I was Lonnie Walker, just say, hey, give me that. Let's roll me over to early bird next year, and then we go.
And then you can make something happen. That would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers they're going to be a very, very interesting team to watch, because more than a lot of other teams, whatever they do now is going to have a massive impact on what they're going to be able to do this summer. Because I just the Westbrook idea of doing a sign and trade with Westbrook, unless it's for a team that's like, hey, we really liked what he did off the bench for them, we think he can be great at 25 million or whatever, we're fine with that, then maybe that exists. I just don't know that that's a realistic thing to be pinning a ton of hopes on if you're an over the cap team.
Sure. All right. We've got plenty of other topics. We have one other Lakers topic to get into, but let's spare everybody who's not here for Lakers, and we'll hold off on that one. Let's talk John Collins at the Atlanta Hawks, a player both you and I are a fan of. Hasn't shot the ball particularly well this season, but thought it was interesting in the Shams piece. Sounded like there was some certainty that John Collins will finally get moved before the trade deadline. I know we were talking all kinds of John Collins trades this past summer. So what's going on there, and what are the Hawks even trying to get in return here?
Yeah, I think because it's important, and we're going to talk Jae Crowder in a minute too. This is what Shams wrote, so we're not this. I'm going to read it verbatim for how he wrote it. In the meantime, and why he's using "in the meantime" is because he just talked a whole bunch about the Lakers and Westbrook and Bogdanovic and all that. And he said, in the meantime, two notable names surely on the market and on the move are Phoenix's Jae Crowder and Atlanta's John Collins. And both you and I both perked up at that and on the
Yeah.
move addition in there, because it's not thrown in there for nothing. Now, if it was just Jae Crowder, okay, sure. I think we all know at some point Jae Crowder is going to be traded. At a bare minimum, Jae Crowder will be traded at the trade deadline, just because there's no point to not doing it if you're the Suns at that point. Just even if you only got a couple second round picks, move on, be done, take those and run. And they're hopeful to get more. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Collins, though, that becomes a little bit more interesting, because I don't know that we have necessarily felt that's a lock for him to be traded. I think we've looked at that more as like, all right, they're for year 5 in a row or whatever, exploring the trade market, but really it's like it's that much of a lock that he's going to be dealt. So I found that very, very interesting.
Yeah, agreed. I thought that was interesting to note that would be a thing that Shams sees as more of a lock, that he is going to get moved. Landing spots. The Hawks have several teams, according to Shams, in the Collins market. Utah is flipped. This is a team we thought would be a seller this season. Now it looks like they may be a buyer. Washington, another team that we've had our eyes on, potentially as a seller, acting perhaps as a buyer here. More on Washington in a bit too, in regards to Kyle Kuzma. Brooklyn and Dallas, no surprise there with either of them being buyers. Also noting that Atlanta hasn't shown interest so far in a potential framework that included Joe Harris. Phoenix is also interested in Collins, but doesn't want to take on his contract, has 4 more years remaining on a 5-year, $125 million deal. Anybody stand out to you as a surprise out of those teams? Utah, Washington, Brooklyn, Dallas, Phoenix as potential suitors?
Well, the Phoenix part, because this is now, I want to say the second or third time this has been mentioned, just stop then, because you can't get the player without taking on his contract. That's just getting stupid now.
We really him, but can we get him without his contract? Is that we hold? I want the cheeseburger, hold the pickles. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. That's not. You're not ordering at a fast food restaurant, Sons.
Right? Yeah, that's like when I roll into Best Buy this afternoon, and I'm like, I really want the 100-inch TV, but I really don't want to pay more than $10 for it. We good? we cool with that? Like, I mean, come on now. But I think the challenge here is with those other teams. Let's use Brooklyn and Dallas first, because it's slightly different math for them. They're both tax teams. So for them, same thing like we talked with the Lakers, it's 125% that they're allowed to offer. So you got to get to about 19 million roughly to match salary on Collins, 23.5 million this year. So with the Nets, kind of funny that the Joe Harris thing is even in there, because you look and you're like, all right, well, Joe Harris, there it is. There's 18.6 million. You throw in one of the guys on a minimum and off we go. But if they're not interested, so then that turns to, all right, well, where are we going next? Don't think it's Ben Simmons, right? I can't imagine that would be a thing they do. So then that turns into Seth Curry, Patty Mills, Royce O'Neal.
Stacking deals.
You're starting to stack some deals together, exactly. Because I don't think Nick Claxton would make a lot of sense. I think you'd want him with Collins if you were going to be there. Royce O'Neal, that one's a little weird because he's kind of their best wing defender right now. But maybe you're thinking, all right, well, we put O'Neal in a deal with, dude, that's a nice poem right there. Put him in a deal with Curry, and now we're almost to where we need to be, throwing one of the minimum salaries, and now we've got to be where we need to go get John Collins. Simmons becomes that main wing defender, and off we go. I'd be a little bit worried you're kind of light on shooting, but I don't know that you feel great about O'Neal shooting in your lineup anyway. So there's ways the Nets can get there. It just becomes it's a little harder if they don't want to do Joe Harris. Now that's where then I instantly go to, can we get a third team involved and move Harris off to a third team? Because I think his shooting would help any number of teams around the league. So maybe we could go there. Dallas, they can do a lot of different things, because you would start basically anything with Dwight Powell, I assume his expiring contract, or Reggie Bullock's. He's a pseudo expiring. His deal's only partially guaranteed for about 5.5 million next year. So you could throw those guys in the mix. Davis Bertans, if you really wanted to pay with picks, that's 16 million. So there's paths there for both of those teams. It's just, I don't know. I'm not sure I see either one of them paying in the end what it's going to take to get John Collins.
Yeah, that's where I keep hitting the wall. Who meets the Hawks asking price to go get John Collins? Who's willing to take on the teams are reluctant to take on long-term deals with the exception of, a number of star level players and things like that. So that's going to be a factor here. I don't know where he ultimately lands. And that's part of why I was so surprised to see Shams write with certainty that he's going to be moved. Interesting to see where he ultimately goes. He's a good player. He's talented. I think he could help a lot of places. Let's hone in on Dallas for a second, though. I mean, the Mavs very clearly need a second player with Luka. They've been searching for that guy forever. I don't know if John Collins really checks that box. He can help. But is this the move the Mavs should make, or should they be looking to do something bigger if they maybe they can't?
Yeah, I assume if you do John Collins, that means you're closing the door on Christian Wood coming back to Dallas after this season, because you probably don't need both of them. They're not similar players in terms of style of play necessarily, but similar in terms of the production level you're going to get out of them. Two more offensive leaning bigs than they are defenders. Two guys who can score, albeit in very different ways. So I just don't know if that's where you go with that. But I think the challenge becomes then is Christian Wood involved in that trade? Because you look at it and say, hey, if we're not re-signing him anyway, we took a shot, didn't really work the way we wanted, we move on from Christian Wood. Maybe Atlanta doesn't want him, but again, maybe that turns into a 3-team construction where he goes somewhere and the value gets delivered to the Hawks elsewhere. So there's reasons why it makes a lot of sense for the Mavs, because then you kind of lock in a little bit more certainty with the players. I happen to like both Collins and Wood quite a bit. So I think I don't know that my evaluation of either players is going to be spot on here. I do wonder with Atlanta though, are they really going to be asking for that high of a price? Because is part of the certainty that he's going to move is we don't really need all that much back. We just need to, we want to, not that he's a bad contract, but we want to get that deal off the books. Give us a shorter, ideally maybe even expiring deal. Let us reset, rebalance our roster a little bit, get him out of here, and off we go. And is that going to be more of the, hey, we don't need 2 first rounders or anything like that for Collins? Because I think if you start asking those prices, maybe you don't get there.
Did you see the finish to that Hawks Bulls game last night?
I did.
My goodness, it looked like 3 game winners in a row. Just boom, boom, boom. Absolutely, absolutely crazy. Incredible stuff.
Hey, one thing, let's stick with this one too, because Washington and Utah are mentioned in here, and let's do Utah first. Just kind of interesting. This is what Danny Ainge does, right? His team's a little bit better than what, I mean, not a lot better than what anybody expected. Maybe we pivot into, all right, let's go for the playoffs ourselves. He's got the contracts. He can put together all kinds of ways to go get John Collins that would make some sense, probably for both sides on this, and maybe even allows the Hawks to get off another contract if they wanted to. And then I think if you're Ainge, you're looking at it and saying, why not? I'll add him to the mix, and we'll throw him out there with some guys we really like, and Lauri Markkanen, and we'll be set up front for years to come. That could be kind of his thinking here. It's almost similar to what he did with the Celtics back in the day when they got better, and then he's like, yeah, I'll take Isaiah Thomas now.
That's interesting idea there.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the Suns and a potential 3-team trade involving Jae Crowder. Now, we've been talking Jae Crowder trades for months, literally, because he hasn't been with the Suns. They've been trying to move him. Now we've got Shams saying that you could be looking at a 3-team trade that fell apart involving the Houston Rockets as well as the Milwaukee Bucks. According to Shams, it would have been Crowder to Milwaukee, 4 Bucks second-round picks plus players, and we can speculate on who those players would be, to Houston, Eric Gordon, and/or that's an interesting and/or, like there's a decent amount of value there. Kenyon Martin Jr. to Phoenix, with the holdup being that the Rockets want, surprise, surprise, a first for Eric Gordon. The Rockets have been trying to get a first for Eric Gordon for what feels like for years, and
at least for the life of our show.
Exactly. And for Martin, a very good first rounder, not a batch of second rounders. So seems like that's kind of where this is held up. The Rockets want more than just a bunch of second rounders. They want first. What's your analysis of this?
Two parts on this. I think one, starting with the Kenyon Martin Jr. portion, this tells me they don't have a ton of interest in trading him.
Yeah.
That they're looking at it as, hey, we'd rather keep him and keep him here. I do think what you're going to run into in Houston very, very quickly is roster spots, because they've had so many first round picks over the last couple of drafts. You're eventually going to run into, you can't roster all these guys. And that's kind of what OKC ran into a little bit. And then OKC, part of why they were able to, remember when they moved up to get Ousmane Dieng in last year's draft, they gave up 3 first rounders. Now they were all protected, all with different protections on them, but to move up in that draft to get Dieng. And part of the reason they did that is twofold. Is one, this is why you collect 1 million picks, so we can kind of overwhelm you with volume versus necessarily, value. But the other piece is we can't make all these picks. Like you run out of roster spots. It's only 15. And nobody selected in the first round is letting you stash them on a 2-way deal. That's never going to happen. So you're in a spot where it becomes, all right, well, we can't make all the picks anyway, so we got to start moving some of them somehow. So that's why I think the Rockets are probably looking at this and saying, all right, well, we want to pick back, but unless you're really going to give us a good pick, I don't need your 15 second round picks. Like that's it's not going to do a lot for me. I can't stash that many guys overseas or in the G League or on my 2-ways and those kind of things. The Eric Gordon portion, I mean, why not, right? It's December 12th as we record this. Just keep pushing and see. But I think we're down to it now with Eric Gordon, because I think a big portion of his value lies in that controllability for next year's contract, where it's non-guaranteed. And I can't imagine Houston brings him back, especially not at the number of over 20 million for next year. So I think that turns into, you've got to kind of move him by this trade deadline, or just say, all right, it is what it is. We're going to roll with Eric Gordon the rest of the way.
Right. I would be surprised to see them get a first for him, but
yeah,
I guess you never, I mean, could
that
be a
screams
first
like 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
2 seconds in a semi-interesting young player. Back that way, like that one says, kind of really screams that to me. And the good thing for the Rockets is they're over the cap, but they are about 14.5 million under the tax. So they've got enough wiggle room, because Gordon is 19.5 million. They could take back like 22 million in salary or salaries to do a trade like that and still be fine, because they're not going to end up anywhere near the tax. So I think that becomes pretty important. So I think, they're definitely a team to watch, because you've got those couple of guys there. But I find the other parts of this a little more interesting. We've talked it before. Crowder, just a perfect fit for Milwaukee, right? Kind of gives them that PJ Tucker piece that they haven't had. It's just, what are going to be the players who move if they get them? I know everybody kind of instantly goes to George Hill and Grayson Allen, and there it is. And maybe that's what it is. I don't get the sense they're jumping at the idea of let's just trade Grayson Allen, because I think they value his shooting. And Chris Middleton, he's out again. Now it's only a sprained ankle, so it should be a brief thing. But I think they want to make sure they keep some of that depth at that second guard creator spot. And not that Grayson Allen's a great player, but he can do a little bit with the ball in his hands. So I am kind of wondering, but maybe Milwaukee's looking at it and saying, he's not going to be a real guy we can play deep in the playoff rounds anyway, because he gets picked on and those kind of things. So, and then the Suns part, if you could snag Eric Gordon, great. That's a nice piece for you to have there, and that's a good bench shooter for a guy who's not even on your team right now. So
it's better than Jae Crowder sitting at home.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
The Heat and the Hawks also interested in Jae Crowder.
Yeah. That feels like now we're getting into the tale as old as time piece here, but yeah. There is I do want to say, for anybody who read this article too, there's something in there that is off. Dwayne Dedmon and Victor Oladipo cannot be traded starting Thursday. Their deals have to wait till January 15th to be traded, because they signed using bird rights for a big enough raise to trigger the longer waiting period on that. Still be traded plenty of time in advance of the trade deadline, but it is not Thursday, as the article states.
Look at you checking up on Sham's work there. I like it.
Somebody, like it. Yeah. I mean, I just, those things will matter because people are
Mm-hmm.
getting all fired up about it. And
For
I
sure.
might have already been asked by 2 different people about that one. So
All right, let's jump over to the Washington Wizards. Kyle Kuzma, more rumblings that he could be on the move. We've seen recently that, maybe he might not. I've seen him say that he, has been able to spread his wings in Washington. I've also seen rumors suggesting that he might kind of want out and
yeah.
want to go to a bigger market, a contender, things like that. What are you doing with him if you're the Wizards? Been important, averaging over 20 points per game.
Yeah, he's set to be one of the best free agents on the market this summer, just with how well he's played. Anybody suggesting that he's going to opt in, he's not. He's going to opt out and either take a ton more money from the Wizards or a lot more money from one of these cap space teams. So makes a lot of sense to me for him, and it would make sense then if the Wizards are like, all right, if you don't really necessarily want to be here, all right, then maybe we move on. That's why we didn't talk about it under the Collins part, because I knew we were going to get to Kuzma. Kuzma for Collins could make some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be something there. I don't know that Kuzma is going to give the Hawks exactly what they need, though. I worry another guy who needs the ball doesn't really defend all that great, doesn't give you a whole lot else, and is that going to fix what you feel like you're not getting from John Collins? Yeah, he's a better shooter and scorer for sure. I just don't know. He's not a better rebounder and he's not a better defender. So I don't know. That fit seems a little odd to me, but I get it if you're Washington. I would explore this because by now you've already had conversations on, all right, hey, what are we looking at? He's not going to extend because he'd leave way too much money on the table.
Right.
But you have an understanding of, all right, you're going to opt out this summer. What is it you're looking for? And if you're the Wizards, where you're willing to go as far as paying him. So this one makes some sense why he might be a player to watch moving forward.
Yeah, if they're not willing to meet that asking price this summer, or if Kuzma wants to move on, then you need to look at trades before the deadline if you're Washington.
And if you're Washington, you've got to factor in Will Barton needs a new contract. Now, Will Barton has been terrible this year. He's having one of the worst years of his career. But you've got to pay Kristaps Porzingis may opt out. And he's actually put together a pretty good year. If you're thinking about keeping Rui Hachimura, he's somebody you need to look at. And then Daniel Gafford, he makes $1.9 million this year, but remember he signed that early extension, so he makes $12.4 million next season. So that's a big number, and that's a pretty big jump. When you're talking a $10 million jump in salary, that becomes something where, all right, now you're no longer the super bargain that you were. And he's been vacillating between out of the rotation to playing spot minutes behind Porzingis up front. So that's another thing you got to factor in. The roster is not as clean as it might be, considering you've got some major guys' contracts coming up due.
And of course, the big overarching question for Washington is what's going to happen with Bradley Beal.
Yeah.
Is something going to brew on the trade front there? Remember, no trade clause, so that will likely go a long way towards determining what the other decisions are for the Wizards. So
yeah,
again,
and
that kind of looms over everything.
And that's a real no trade clause. It's not one of these 1 year no trade clauses, which a handful of guys have around the league. That is a real no trade clause where he basically can say, "No, I'm good. I don't want to go. I don't want to go here. I don't want to go there," and block it and just stick around. So that's so something else. Yeah, you got to keep an eye on with them. And they've slipped. I want to say they've lost. Let me look it up. Yeah, they've lost 6 in a row. They were 11-10, and now they're down 11-16. They're down. Getting close to the Magic, Hornets, and Pistons at the bottom of the conference, kind of mirroring last year, right? They got out to that really good start, and then it kind of fell apart and crumbled on them. But this year, I think you can maybe look at it so maybe a little bit more injury related. So hopefully you get Beal back in the lineup and get some of these guys going, and you can pick it back up and be in the play in mix, I should say. Not playoff, but play in mix, and maybe. But I don't know. It's a tough road for Washington ahead.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be a team to watch that may, as much as we've talked the Bulls and them potentially deciding to pull the plug, the Wizards are another team definitely to keep an eye on for that. Let's bookend everything with Lakers. It's not just Bogdanovic, could be interested, have had talks on Cam Reddish, Evan Fournier. Cam Reddish, the one that got away, the infamous trade deadline deal, 3-team deal with the Raptors and Knicks that fell apart. at the trade deadline last year. Evan Fournier, once again, never Google, but he is under contract for this season and next season, has I believe it's a team option on a third year.
Yep.
Both of these guys out of the rotation, but Lakers have had talks with the Knicks on both of them. What are your thoughts on these? Like very different caliber of player compared to Bogdanovic when we're talking about Evan Fournier and Cam Reddish here.
Yeah, not as clean as the Lakers are making a decision between the two. It's not like the Rob Pelinka and crew are deciding, should we get Reddish or Fournier or Bogdanovic? But if they were, Bogdanovic all day long. For me, I don't even think it's that's even a real question, right? I don't get the Cam Reddish stuff. Like, I mean, he's fine.
He's clutch.
Well, there is that.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely true. But he's 23 now. He's not like 20 years old anymore, where it's like, all right, he may really still pop and turn into something. Like, it's not that he's a finished product by any means, but I don't know. He's never stayed healthy, never been all that great when he's been on the floor. And part of that, I think, has been the injuries, the role, the inconsistency. But the Knicks gave him a starting job this year, and he couldn't hang on to it. He lost it. Now he's completely out of the rotation. So if I was the Lakers, I mean, for me, the challenge comes in no way am I giving up anything approaching even a single unprotected first-round pick for these two guys. Like, that'd be absolute. That's ludicrous. Yeah. And then I really have to think long and hard. Are these the guys I want to sacrifice my cap space for next summer? Because Fournier, 18 million into next year, and then Reddish needs a new contract. He needs to be re-signed. So there it is. Your cap space is completely gone. I'd probably, this is a stay away for me from the Lakers side. And I think the Knicks, they're going to have to eventually, I imagine, either say, we're going to take back some questionable money if we're going to attach Reddish to Fournier, and we're kind of, you take ours, we'll take yours, and we'll both move on. Or you got to pull Reddish is not a sweetener to Fournier just because he needs paid. I just don't see teams jumping at it as like, oh, this is great. I mean, it's not. I think there's a sense out there is it's almost like throwing in a first round pick on top of getting rid of Fournier, but it isn't. Reddish doesn't have that kind of value anymore.
No. Well, and that's where I'm wondering if that's where this is really. If the Lakers are interested in Reddish, they have been for a while. If the price is low enough, sure, you can take a flyer, but we've heard the Knicks want to attach Reddish to Fournier and use him as that sweetener to get rid of Fournier. And that's where, like you said, the opportunity cost for the Lakers is simply too high to take those guys. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be too biased here, but when I look at the deal and I look at the money involved, like if the Lakers were to offer pure expirings for these two guys, I would expect the Knicks to be the team to have to kick something in. Now, I don't know that New York would want to do that, but just the amount of money you're taking on, that seems to make sense for two non-rotation guys.
Yeah. Now, if the Lakers could get Reddish by himself,
that's different.
Like Kendrick Nunn, that's different. Yeah, do that because then you get to see Reddish for the rest of the season. Make your own decision. Do we think he fits and go and off we go, and that'd be fine. And that's you could do that. Even if you did Nunn in a crappy second rounder. I imagine they probably have some extra second rounder that's not very good. I'm not going to look it up right now, but if you could do that, great. Then by all means. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not giving up much of value, especially the play of, I don't know. This is where I become too much of a cap space nerd, but I want the cap space over Reddish and Fournier next year. I will say too, on the Knicks side of this, I wonder too, if this is one where they let it go to are you going to be too stubborn for too long? Yeah. And then you kind of run out of options at the end and it turns into, well, now there's nothing left. So I guess we just got to ride it out. And again, if you're not going to re-sign Cam Reddish, this turns into, we got to move it. And the last thing I'll say on this is this kind of to tie it back to what we talked about with Bogdanovic at the beginning of the show. Past price and cost needs to be taken out of future value. Because I've seen and read some stuff from people who cover the Knicks with the Knicks gave up a first round pick for Cam Reddish a year ago. So they don't feel like they can. Well, you can't double down on making a bad mistake. Just because you gave up a first round pick doesn't mean you're getting one back. And it's the same thing with Bogdanovic, right? But in a different way. Just because the Pistons got him for relatively nothing doesn't mean that's what he's worth to them now, right? Like it's
Right.
they're gonna get something back better than what they got. And I think that was just a case of Danny Ainge saying, "Hey, I can get a guy I clearly like in Kelly Olynyk, and I can clear things up and get Bogdanovic off to a different spot." My guess is with how quickly he extended after, there was some pre-knowledge of like, hey, we can do an extension after you're traded here, and they got that done. But that to me makes, like I said before, makes him more valuable than if he was an expiring and could just jump. So that's where it starts to turn into, all right, we're in some different spots now with these guys, and what you paid previous, that doesn't really matter anymore. That's out the window. It's about where are we at today.
Exactly. Great point, and a good way to finish off our show here. This is fun. We've got all kinds of and I'm expecting more of this.
I got to do math.
That's right. We get to do all kinds of fun stuff, and we get to do all that. Of course, February 9th is the trade deadline, so plenty of time for all of this stuff to kind of play out. It's going to be fun.
Trevor, can I make a prediction?
Yeah.
I know you like when I make predictions.
Ooh, I like it.
So trade season unofficially opens on December 15th. Within 1 week of trade season opening, we will have a trade. And it'll be a meaningful trade. It won't be some minor salary dump thing like we see at the trade deadline. It'll be, I'm not going to say it's going to swing the finals, but we're going to get a meaningful trade by December 22nd. So 10
Merry
days.
Christmas indeed.
Yeah. I just, the last 4 seasons, we've gotten one within a month of the trade window opening. The 1 year is a little wonky because we started the season in November, so it was everything was a little bit off. But it's that's my guess is we're gonna get a trade within the first week of all these guys freeing up and being able to be moved. So there's my prediction for us.
All right. I like it. Bring the trades, bring the fun. Let's go. Make sure you are subscribing to the NBA Front Office Show. Stay up to date with all of the trade talks around the NBA. Turn on notifications as well. Of course, if you're listening to the podcast version, make sure you're following us over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.